What's going on, guys? It is Tuesday, March 4th. My name is Sebastian Carcioni. I own one of the nation's largest powerlifting gyms, MPG Fitness. I also direct something like 10 or 15 local events per year, and I am on a mission to revolutionize strength sports. Joining me today is Bill. What's going on, Bill?
How's it going, Sebastian?
Good. Is it Coyne? It's Coyne, I guess.
It's Coyne,
Okay,
yes.
because you always are announcing everyone else's names. There's really no one's announcing your name. Um, so a little bit. So actually, Bill has been with me since literally the beginning of meet directing. Like he emceed the first meet I ever directed. Actually, to this day, probably the most fun meet. I don't think there's ever been. We have. There's just no way to recreate an atmosphere like that. You're really not supposed to have 400 people inside of an 8,000 square foot building. So we really haven't got back to that, but me and Bill talked back and forth about this, and so Bill, go ahead and give people your background.
Yeah,
I actually don't know a whole lot about this. Maybe start from the beginning.
sure. There's plenty of lore to cover because I've been around powerlifting for a long time. At this point, most of my life. So how I first got into this was similar story to a lot of people, to where I was not a particularly good athlete growing up. I grew up in Fort Worth, Texas. Went to a high school with a very successful football program, and I wanted to be a part of that. But something I noticed as an incoming freshman, that the people who were the best players on varsity, got the most playing time, were the strongest, and I was not very strong. So I figured, okay, this is maybe a path for me to work my way up and become a better football player. And it was. Um, and I ended up getting really more into the lifting side than football. I still played 4 years through high school, but lifting was what really caught my attention. And so I really started getting into, initially it was just like a lot of people start just reading as many of the glossy magazines that you would find at, the bookstore, at a gas station,
The
Muscle and Fitness.
muscle and fitness, yeah,
Yes,
muscle and
yes,
fitness, yeah.
exactly.
Yep.
And my dad had a subscription to
So
Men's
just to be
Health.
clear, we
Yes,
all lived the same experience. We all have the
yes,
same shared
yeah.
experience. Go ahead.
That was really our first source of information, right? Because that's just what was immediately in front of us.
Yeah.
And so there was some good stuff in there. And then uh, in a Men's Health article, I came across an article about competitive powerlifting, and this is like fall 2005. And at this point, competitive powerlifting was it really was unrecognizable from what it is now, because what competitive powerlifting really was, especially in the United States, was multiply untested powerlifting. That was the biggest game. So this is, again, 2005, and that's what it talked about. And of course, the biggest name in that little tiny, subgenre of lifting was West Side Barbell. So the article went on to talk about West Side. It talked about Dave Tate and Elite FTS. And so I saw that website. I saw the numbers that these guys were putting up too, because so at the time at my high school, the on the record boards, the biggest number on the record board was, there was a guy who graduated a couple of years before I went there that ended up becoming a linebacker at UConn, and his best squat in high school was 500 pounds. And at the time, I thought that was like the pinnacle of human performance, right? It was like a 500-pound squat.
That was. I mean, when we were in high school, 500 pounds
Yes.
squat. I mean, I think there was
Yeah.
maybe 2 or 3 kids at a pretty large high school that I went to that even squatted that.
Yeah,
So,
and
right.
it still is for a
Yeah.
high school kid. That's still very good. But then on the first page of this article, it was just a full one-page picture of this guy named Mike Miller, who was one of the best multiply squatters in the world. Some people, you've seen him, but you don't know who he is. He actually was he was in The Wrestler with Mickey Rourke. And if anybody's ever seen that, there's a scene where Mickey Rourke and this huge, I mean, Mike was like 6'7", at his peak was about 400 pounds, but there's a scene where they're in a supermarket testing out like different like frying pans and stuff to like seeing what they can hit each other with. So Mike Miller ended up having kind of a, sort of successful acting career as well. But it had his picture on it was a full one page, full picture of him on this whole page of the magazine. And then it had his best numbers, his best competition numbers in the corner. And at the time, his best squat was 1050. And I remember seeing that and just being blown away that there's a comma in that number, right? I'm thinking 500 at
Right.
the time is
Yeah.
huge. And then I see 1,000. And so that's where it really, that's unbelievable. I want to figure out how to do something like that. So it mentioned Westside, it mentioned Elite FTS. So I started reading everything, all the articles on Elite FTS. I started reading all of Louis' articles that they had on the Westside website. But of course, like a lot of that stuff, especially Louis' articles, were just way over my head because I'm like 14, 15 at the time. So I started kind of looking around and seeing where I could get some help. And I ended up coming across Josh Bryan and his website. And so, a lot of these guys, this is something which is really great at the time. It was a small enough community to where even the top guys, the best athletes in the sport, were super, super accessible, right? Like famously,
Right.
Louis Simmons put his phone number in all of his articles in Powerlifting USA and said, like, if anybody has a question about it, just give me a call. Like, here's my personal phone number that you can call and like reach out to. And tons of people did. And so I remember, on Josh's website, it said, hey, you got any questions? Shoot me an email. So I did. I asked him something about like squats or something, but he responded back with a good answer. But he said like, "Hey, where do you live?" I said, "I'm in Arlington, Texas." And he said, "Well, I'm about to move there. Do you want to come train with me?" I'm like, "Yeah, absolutely." And at the time, Josh was the youngest person to have benched 600 raw in a meet, which I think he did when he was 22 or 23. Great resume. Had a 909 squat to go along with that. A little while after that, he put an 810 deadlift on top of that. But unbelievably strong dude. And I ended up training with him at the original Metroflex in Arlington, Texas. So we started training there right at the end of Ronnie Coleman's Olympia run.
Got the Metro. I mean, Branch Warren had to be there.
Yeah. So it was a really incredible time because it was right at the end. So Ronnie was still the king. The year that I started training there was when he won his last Olympia, and then he came back the next year and lost to Jay Cutler, and that was it. But Ronnie was still the king. Branch Warren was up and coming, right? Like this big up and coming guy. And, even though he didn't win an Olympia, he really made a name for himself, placed well in other shows, won some Arnold Classics. But it was a crazy time to be at that gym. And that's not to talk about all the absolutely insane
So this is a weird question. And
yes, go ahead.
Related. It's how much did it cost like a month to train there? Do you remember?
It was like $20 a month. It was super cheap. Super cheap. Yeah. Super cheap. And it was just an insane collection. Obviously you had people like Ronnie and Branch and Josh, but then you had all these guys that nobody had ever heard of outside of like the local scene that were all super strong, super jacked. And just had been there like forever, right? And so you really I really learned mostly what I learned there was the attitude that you had to bring to it. Like I've never seen anybody, even now, as focused as Josh was when he was still competing and when he was training. I used to go in pretty early because I would train with Josh at night, and he would be training kind of mid-afternoon, and his main training partner was a guy named Paul Leonard, who's now pretty active here on Instagram, but. I used to come in early and kind of watch them wrap up their workouts because they were so focused, they were so intense on everything that they did, and I just love watching it. It was super inspirational. So that was like the biggest thing I took away from there. And then when I graduated from high school, I went to this tiny college in New Mexico that had a gym, but no athletics program, no really any athletes to speak of there. But I wanted to keep training, and they had some racks, some bars, enough to get the job done.
I'm going to keep on the timeline. So that's what year is that around?
So that's 2008.
Okay. So you were a member of Metroflex around in high school.
Yes.
Around 2008. Okay.
2005 to 2008. Yep, exactly. And I did I'll back up a little bit. So I did my first meet then in 2006. So that's when like first time really, you can actually say like, okay, you're competing in powerlifting, you're part of it now. And then I spotted and loaded, helped out at a ton of meets that Josh and Brian Dodson from Metroflex promoted. So pretty involved with it from the time I was 16, on. And then when I came to New Mexico for college, that's where my coaching career began, because it was really out of necessity. Went to this small school. I wanted to keep lifting. I wanted some training partners, but nobody knew how to lift weights. So I had to teach people how to.
And this was all single ply, right? There was nothing you were doing was raw.
So this is interesting because Josh was one of the first big raw guys because his bench press especially was so strong. And so this is going back in like the late 2000s. even in the super heavyweight class, like if you had a 600-pound multiply bench press, that was still pretty good, right? Like this is right before people started getting the really crazy carryover out of gear, right? So here's kind of to give you an example of the discrepancy at the time. So Scott Mendelson would kind of go back and forth between doing raw and equipped meets, and Scott for a long time had the raw bench press record at 715, but at the same time he was kind of just getting into the 800s in a multiply shirt. So that really tells you like how much that's changed, what the carryovers are like now. Because you're talking multiply denim shirt, he's getting maybe 100 on a good day, 150 pounds out of it. That's it. So Josh was one of the first guys to really push raw lifting because, again, he was so strong without the equipment, so he didn't really need it. So he got kind of frustrating because he started to see all these guys that weren't really that strong without the gear. So he's just like, well, screw it, let's do raw. So actually, that first meet that I did in 2006 was a raw meet. It was unequipped. It was a small little thing at the Ronnie Coleman Classic, it was like this weird thing at the time because nobody was doing like strictly unequipped lifting. So that's really where it started. It was weird because even the Texas High School Powerlifting Association is equipped, right? That tells you, like, even high school, they're having freshmen get into single ply bench shirts, squat suits, and knee wraps, right? So that everything was equipped. It was almost unheard of to be doing raw stuff at the time, and that's actually kind of what kept me from doing a lot more meets. Was, if you were going to do a powerlifting meet, especially in Texas, like you were going to do a multiply meet, and I just didn't have the money for a $400 squat suit. And when you're young too, like you're going to grow out of it pretty quickly too. So it's like you're going to have to keep buying the stuff. It was just a pain in the ass. So when I went to college, partly because had to start from scratch with a lot of my training partners, it was just like, well, screw it, we're going to do raw. And that was right around the time sort of the first big wave of raw lifting started to hit, right? This is even kind of before before the Lilly bridges really blew up, and before Dan Green came onto the scene, before Brandon Lilly came out of gear and into raw lifting. But it was moving in that direction. But when I started competing in New Mexico, the only Fed at the time was NASA, which great little, what's that?
Still exists.
Still exists. Rich Peters is still at it. Great tiny little Fed. But it was about 50-50 between raw and single ply lifters. And this is again between 2010 and 2012. But definitely this movement towards raw. And it made it a lot easier because, again, you could tell people, oh no, there's a whole division which is just raw now. Because before there weren't the different divisions, right? Like if you went to an APF meet back in, again, the mid 2000s, there was one division. There wasn't the difference between equipped and raw. Everybody was just thrown into the same thing. So it was a little discouraging for people to where well, okay, maybe I've got a decent raw squat, I'm a 600-pound squatter or something like that, but I'm going against a guy in 4 layers of gear that's going to squat 800 or 900, right? It's right. It's not all that fun.
It forces. I mean, it's why a lot of guys went from tested to untested, maybe 5-10 years ago, because what are you going to do? All the money was on that side, so you had to switch over. It's the same thing. I mean, it's like path of least resistance. Where does the water flow? Like we're seeing now with Powerlifting America, everyone's flowing that way because that's where everything's kind of at. Same thing in business. The hot gym opens down the road, you're gonna move over to there. Everyone always wants a hotter girlfriend. No one's ever like, oh, I don't want a hotter girlfriend.
I don't want more money. Exactly. Yeah. But anyway, so that's going back a ways, and I can make everything, the rest of it, a lot shorter. After college, I graduated, moved to Chicago. Initially got involved at B&W Gym, which is Dennis Brady's gym. And I know you've mentioned before, Dennis Brady is such an OG. His USAPL membership number is 6, which is hilarious. Yeah. It's literally some single digit number. And I'm gonna have to take some of the credit for Dennis getting back into the game, because I don't know if Dennis has never done a lot to get any kind of recognition for himself. Dennis was one of the biggest meet promoters in the world back in the 90s, right? He put on IPF World
I mean,
Championships in Chicago.
Just some context. Dennis was the former president of
Yeah.
USA
Mhm.
Powerlifting. And he owned a gym in the city. And you're going to go ahead and continue on your. He was obviously a big meat pro. I mean, Worlds was there at one point.
Yeah, in legit IPF Worlds he hosted
Mm-hmm.
in Chicago, along with a ton of national championship meets over the decades he was involved, right? But this will kind of give you some context on how much things have changed too. But so I kept competing when I moved up to Chicago, and again, even when I first came to B&W, so we had this really solid Saturday crew of guys that would come from all over the city, and some guys would come in from the burbs to all train together.
And when was this? When was this with the crew?
2012 is when this would have when I moved up there. So late 2012. But most of the guys there were still competing multiply because Dennis had stopped doing meets, and the only Fed that was around in Chicago area at the time was the APF. So it just that we're doing meet. Yes, yeah. So Eric Stone and the APF were the only game in town. So same sort of things. It's like, well, that's everybody's doing what everybody's doing. I didn't, again, same sort of reasons. It's like, I don't feel like buying a bunch of equipment for this, right? Like, I just want to lift weights and go, and compete, try to beat my numbers and see what I can do at the local level. And so initially I started doing, because the only place I could go, I'd have to travel out of state for USAPL meet. So I'd have to go to Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, and Wisconsin at that point. And finally it got to the point where I convinced some other people to start doing USAPL meets up in Wisconsin with me when and most of the people there were competing raw. So that kind of made it easy because, they
was
saw.
Was this Appleton? Was this?
Not yet.
Okay.
No, this was before Quentin Myers had his own gym and was doing meets up there. So this is close. This is all around the Milwaukee area is where it was, in the burbs there. Yeah. And I remember what was interesting to see and talk to Dennis about this, so again, Dennis has been around since the beginning of the sport, right? He saw it when it was really at like its first peak of, like, you went to a nationals and there were thousands of spectators there, in part because there was one nationals, right? It wasn't this alphabet soup of federations, right?
Yeah,
because it was just the USPF. So you saw one Fed, it was one national, so you knew that's where the best lifters were.
All the way back. I mean, we got to have a historian on it. So we got to have like Matt Gary talk about this.
At
some point, because I mean, the USPF. I mean, that was the first big split.
Yes,
was the USPF, and they got into it about drug testing, and they wanted to split off, and history repeats itself, right?
How about that? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm obviously heavily involved in PA, and I remember we were sitting at high school nationals last year, and she's like, Tamara Lopes, the treasurer, goes, "It's the same shit, right? We'll argue about drug testing, and we split up, and then if you leave the IPF, the IPF has power because the quantity of the nations that are in it. So it ends up kind of dying after that. But yeah, continue along the lines you're talking about.
So then I convinced some people to come do this meet with me outside of Milwaukee. And I was trying to talk Dennis into just coming and seeing it, because I told him, like, Dennis, this is going to be a 200-person local level meet on 4 platforms. Like, that was like unheard of at the time. So this is January 2015 of when this was.
Right.
So this is right as raw and powerlifting as a whole is really starting to blow up again. And so and Dennis thought I was full of shit, because again, he's like, he thinks back to when the glory days of when it was all clean, neat, one Fed, all that other stuff.
Yep.
And he came up there and he couldn't believe it, because he's old. He's not online, right? He doesn't pay attention to social media stuff. And so that convinced him to start doing meets again. And you want to talk about, you mentioned that first MPG meet of how crazy it was. This was even crazier. So you've been to B&W, and for anybody that hasn't been there before, it's in a basement of like a century-old building. The ceilings are maybe 7.5, 8 feet tall, with no HVAC at all down there, right? And it's a fire trap, man. Like, you're just waiting. Like, there's pieces of asbestos floating through. It's a beautiful place. But so when I convinced Dennis to start doing meets again after he came and saw, like, dude, powerlifting's back. A big thing that Dennis was always really involved in, partly through his ex-wife, Sandy Brady, who's in the USAPL Hall of Fame. He was always really involved on the women's side of powerlifting. Like B&W Gym produced a lot more champion women's lifters than they did men's lifters. So his first meet that he did back was a women's raw meet through the USAPL. And Sebastian, if you can picture that back room, well, partly here's what added to it. Somehow, just by coincidence, Gino was in Chicago that weekend. So we convinced, it's just like, he was like, yeah, of course, I'll come announce it and everything. Dude, that entire back room, you could not move. There were so many people in there.
Oh, right.
It was unbelievable. It would just jam packed, all up and like crowding the platform. It was insane. And that would really, and that convinced him. I mean, really, both of us. It's like, damn, dude, look at how big this has gotten, right? And it's only grown more since then. And then I've since gone on to, I owned a gym up in Evanston. Yeah.
Debatable.
What?
Since
that?
Debatable. Past couple of years, and we might need to get into this. Past couple of years, we've seen some drop off. I don't know if that's economic.
Sure.
COVID.
Sure.
But I just like to catch people when they say that. I'm like, well, what are the metrics? What metrics are we using? Our feelings?
Fair enough.
Is the algorithm producing more powerlifting content because I like more powerlifting? Like, that's what I feel like it is a lot. Like, powerlifting's growing. I'm like, no, your algorithm is just spitting back what you like. And so you're like, oh, this is growing. So I haven't actually done enough research on it. But,
we'll jump into that in a second. But then, like, I've gone on, I owned a gym, and then this is kind of transitioning into more of the topic of youth and development of powerlifting. So 2017, I opened my own little gym up in Evanston, Illinois.
So that
ran that for 5 years.
No, that's
okay. So there you go. So I owned, it was called Cradle Strength Systems. Ran that for 5 years, which, overlapped with COVID, which is absolutely insane. So it burned me out on that.
Because I started in 2020, so there was overlap of us owning gyms.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So then I got super burned out on it. Then sold it to a guy so it's still there, but it's now rebranded as Northside Boxing and Fitness. But it's still there if you ever want to go check it out. My logo's still on all the platforms that I made. So and then I kind of took a hiatus from the coaching world for a while, moved back down to New Mexico, and then have gotten involved with it. And now I'm pretty heavily involved with the relatively new New Mexico High School Powerlifting Association. So that's sort of where I'm at now. Been active in a lot of discussions over the past couple of months of how to grow the sport at the youth level, and then especially how do we get these kids, how do we kind of leverage the resources that we have to try to keep these kids in the sport, right? Particularly in New Mexico, because it's just, New Mexico is a weird state because it's extremely insular. Most people never leave the state, like not even they move away, but like a lot of people their entire lives don't even travel outside of the state. It's extremely weird, insular kind of place. And there's some pros and cons to that. But part of it is it's great that there's something for these kids. Something which is really interesting about powerlifting here is that, and Sebastian, here's some interesting numbers for you. So New Mexico, in terms of just land mass, in terms of just square mileage, one of the biggest states in the country. But the city of Chicago now has 2.5, 2.6 million just within the city limits of Chicago. The entire state of New Mexico, it's about 2.1 million people in the entire state. So very sparsely populated, really spread out, tons of tiny little towns that are pretty poor too. And one of the reasons that powerlifting is a great sport for a state like this is that it doesn't require a lot of resources in terms of equipment or finances, right? If you can just buy a decent bar, a few metal plates in a rack, you're good to go, right?
Yeah.
And those things will last
even
decades.
High-end equipment, amortized, is not very expensive.
Yes.
Even nice stuff is not super crazy. I mean, you can get. I mean, they're selling a Hanzu combo rack for $1,400.
So that's
there really isn't. I mean, I really don't see the barrier to entry being super high. I mean, every local gym has a barbell and a squat rack. That's not a Planet Fitness. So, and that's one of the things that makes me really bullish about what I'm trying to do, because I'm like, even before we were really a powerlifting gym, everyone's still squat, bench, and deadlift. Like everyone has relatable. Everyone knows. Like people are like, oh, powerlifting is not mainstream. I'm like, what do you like? In what context? Like, what the events aren't mainstream? I mean, there's 2 events a year, so they're not going to be super mainstream. Of course, they're in weird time zones. Of course, they're not going to be mainstream. But powerlifting itself is extremely mainstream.
Yeah.
Like,
all you have to, and the best evidence of that is, like you said, everybody does it, but not just that people are doing it, but you look at the layout of a commercial gym from 20 years ago to where it is now, to where it was not uncommon to go into an LA Fitness and not find a squat rack, or to go into a Lifetime Fitness. There were no platforms.
right.
You couldn't deadlift.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
now Lifetime Fitnesses are full of racks, and not just racks. Dude, Lifetime's buying Eleiko equipment. They're buying Eleiko power bars, Eleiko, like not just the basic equipment, but like they're buying the brand name stuff, right? You know, the real high end stuff. So that's,
I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if you see. I think they would sequester it, but I wouldn't surprise if you see a Lifetime power station where it's like a little room and it's got chalk, but it would be the Lifetime brand, right? It would be Eleiko racks that were custom, and it's not out of the realm because, like, to be completely honest, like if they started doing that, I would just go, I'll go work on something else, right?
Yeah.
You know, like,
They don't have the rooms, but they do have. Lifetime has dedicated lifting classes.
Yes.
Where it's like you're gonna do a squat, you're gonna do a bench press, you're gonna do like a deadlift, something like that, and they do those. You know, those are regular classes that they offer. So again, mainstream in the sense of, is the sport mainstream? No, but like way more people are doing at least the lifts and have that familiarity with it. Yeah.
Here's what I would say. I'd say let's think about it in the context of the UFC, right? When the UFC came out, jiu-jitsu was not mainstream at all, right? So it's inverse, right? So like you have the UFC, which was popular, and then jiu-jitsu, which was not, right? And then now in powerlifting, we have this weird thing where the sport is extremely like well known, but then the competitive professional is very, very small, right? And like that's super odd, right? To have something that everyone knows about that then has no monetization at the bottom of the funnel.
Yes.
And so that's where the business comes in. But I want to talk more about the youth stuff before we get into too much of that stuff. But yeah, so like now I guess we'll segue into like what are good ideas? Like what ideas do you have in terms of the developmental? I guess let's start with like what age we're getting kids under a barbell. Like how young is that? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you can start them at any age. The problem in what seems to be the biggest problem is loading them too early, right? Like you should have. I worked with kids as young as 8. You can have them do the movements, right? You can have them do a squat. You can have them do a very light deadlift. You can have them do a very light bench, right? And in fact, you should have them do that, because the earlier they can get down the movements and get them to do it properly, the more that's going to carry over as they get older, right? So there's no reason you can't start them as early as you want to, right? The real question is going to be, how do you train them, right? Because it's this is
a general consensus is like 8 to 10 is is like the proper age. And also remember, there's a stigma that we have to overcome. Like when a parent comes in and says, "Oh, is it okay if my kid lifts with a barbell?" Like you have to be able to have that conversation. I've actually gotten really good at this. I go, back in the day, kids used to work on farms, right? Do you know how heavy a hay bale is?
Well, another counter argument would be like, well, like the incidence of CTE in powerlifting is almost non-existent. So we let them play contact.
Directions you can go. Yeah. I think that's just important when we talk about let's say we develop a program and we have to sell that to parents. We're not selling it to kids, right? We have to go, hey, why is this cool? So I was at a local meet last month, and biggest pop from the crowd, 8-year-old kid comes up, crowd goes absolutely nuts. So I'm like, I got to do a youth meet. I got to have 12 kids, and I got to have all their friends and all their families come and watch them lift. I think that would be just the coolest thing. So that's where I think we need to spawn in at. We need to spawn in with that. That's cool.
The challenge is, and so this is an issue with youth sports across the board. And I've got a Substack, and I wrote an article about this a few months ago, just because something that really caught my eye was I read about Tommy John surgery, and now more than half of all the Tommy John surgeries uh, across the board are performed on kids under the age of 18. That 55% of them. That's, so more kids are having Tommy Johns now than professional baseball players, which is pretty insane. And so,
well,
part of
aren't high school, not to get into this, to devolve into this discussion, but isn't high school just a larger percentage of the population?
But that's still
like much,
it
like,
non
much,
but non-contact injuries should not be that common in the youth in youth sports. Like, again, football, yeah, I get it. You're gonna, like, kids are gonna tear their ACLs. Like, it's just, you're gonna get rolled up. Like, it's a violent sport. Things are gonna happen. But, like, you're telling me your throwing arm is getting torn up just because you're throwing it too much. And so this goes back to thinking about powerlifting, and this is something actually that this is what the Texas High School Powerlifting Association was created for. That initially existed just to give football players motivation to train in the off season, right? So the goal wasn't really to produce powerlifters. The goal was, we just want to have the meets, and we want to have something organized so we can keep kids in the weight room during the late winter and into the spring, right before summer workouts hit, right? And so, yes, and so I think there needs to be more of an emphasis. And so this is a huge part, and a lot of parents are seeing this in New Mexico that I talk to them now. They're talking about, oh, my kid primarily plays baseball or football or etc. But since they've started lifting, they've seen this direct carryover to their performance on the track or on the field, whatever their other sport is, right? And so I think that's a big part of it. Is obviously you and I want to see specifically the sport of powerlifting grow, but that's got to be a huge part of it, and getting kids involved in it. This is, lifting more weight at that age, especially when they're young, is not, that's not the end in itself. Especially if they're in other sports, you want to be able to say, like, this is going to have this great carryover, not just to performance, but in terms of injury prevention too, right? This is something which plagues not just baseball, but all youth sports, is that early specialization, right? Is getting them siloed into in one sport even before they're 10, and have them hyper focused on just one individual sport, which doesn't work. It doesn't. If you want to go back to kind of thinking about, and kind of start talking about, like, I read a lot of the Soviet manuals, right? And the big thing they talk about is your base is GPP, right? So the whole model of athletic development is this big pyramid, right? And so the broader the base and the pyramid is, the more you can build not just a higher peak, but a more stable peak. And being strong is part of that. That's a huge part of that, right? And that's going to have probably a greater effect on your average kid's performance and ability to stave off injury than anything else than they do, right? So I think that's kind of a good gateway for a lot of kids, and especially getting the parents to buy into it as well, is to say, like, well, this is, it's fun to do the meets, like, because they're hanging out with their friends and they're able to push their limits a little bit. But the biggest thing would maybe be to say, like, okay, this is going to have all these other benefits outside of just getting stronger or just lifting weights.
Yeah, I don't think that's a difficult sell at all. I guess in the context of my gym, we have a ton of athletes, like hundreds of athletes of all different sports. And so within the context of the gym, it's not hard for me to convince a parent. I mean, parents are usually the ones reaching out to us to, like, get their kids into lifting. It's not the other way around. So what I'm kind of proposing is, how I did sports when I was a youth, I think the high school level is pretty obvious what to do, and the college level is also kind of pretty obvious what to do. But I think what I'm looking at is below the high school age. That's what I'm looking to start kids at. And so what happens is, you got a brochure from the local community park district. You got a brochure, and it had all their programs. It had everything, right? It had equestrian, it had cooking, it had all these things. And it would have a cost, and you kind of talk with I talk with my mom, talk with my dad, and we'd go, oh, we're gonna, like, what are we gonna do? Can I do this? Can I do this? Can I do this? Because parents want to get their kids involved in something. So what I would love to see is, I want to see gyms reach out to parents at their facilities and go, hey, you're a member here. We want to offer you free or very, very low cost program. We meet 3 days a week. We train squat, bench, deadlift. We do that for 12 weeks, and then they come and do a meet. So what I would do is I'd make the program free or low cost, but then when the meet comes around, we charge the spectators like $20 to come in. You're going to bring grandma, grandpa, Johnny, Susie, Willie. And so we have to make an economic case for gym owners too. You're going to bring all those people back, charge them $20, you make a couple $100 on the program. And then what happens is I tend to think very, very long term. What I figure is 5-10 years from now, a certain number of those kids will continue to play in the sport. And that's where everything weaves into what I'm doing, right? So I have a very long lens with this. I'm 28, right? So I can be like, I imagine, in the next, before I'm 50, in the next 20 years, if I start now developing a youth program, by the time I have the Pro Powerlifting League or whatever, all those kids that started very, very young across the country will be eventually part of they'll either be fans, they'll be competitors, they'll have their kids. We have to start now at the youth level. So that's why I wanted to have this conversation. It's been on my mind a lot because I tend to have, like I said, a long-term view of these things. But I'm curious your thoughts on, obviously at the high school level, I feel like it's not easier, but it's like sports are already part of high school, right? So all you do is in Texas it's really big, in Wisconsin it's really big, in Louisiana it's really big. And if we had a professional league, it would be even bigger, right? So I think that stuff will almost take care of itself in a weird way. So I really like to focus on even younger than that because that will support these future endeavors that we're trying to do. But yeah, curious your thoughts on what we could do there.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the first thing to tackle is thinking about this long term, right? Of not just meet to meet or even year to year, right? Of saying, okay, this is where it starts and there's a 10-year trajectory to this, right? Which again, the Soviets were super good at, we're not very good at. Another thing we're not very good at is not just the long-term thinking, but kind of big collective efforts like that, especially in sports. Because ideally that would be that wouldn't just be a local thing, right? It'd be great if you're like MPG Fitness were just doing that.
No, I'm proposing we need a national program.
Yes. And just Americans generally not very good at kind of big collective efforts like that, right?
You know what we are good at?
Yes.
Making money. So that's what's missing. How do we convince gym owners that this is going to make them money?
Yes.
Right? Youth sports is one of the largest business verticals in the country, in the world. And so I think what we need to do is we need to capture that travel sport ethos mentality and just bring it to powerlifting, right? Parents want their kids to be the best at something. And I guarantee you there are some kids out there who are the biggest and the strongest and who would be very, very good at powerlifting that maybe aren't good in another sport.
Yes.
And so I think what we need to focus on, we need to find the A. Yes. Exactly. We need to find the AA. We need to be the A. I know the AAU gets a dirty rap and whatever, but guess what? They make a fuck ton of money and they get a lot of eyeballs and they're still around. We need our AAU version. And this is what Powerlifting America is supposed to be, but it's not because of any number of reasons. But basically, we need an AAU version of powerlifting. We need something where I, as a local gym owner, can go and affiliate with an AAU. I can start an AAU powerlifting team, powerlifting club. Start that club. The AAU has a national marketing effort, networks with professional leagues and stuff and other sports and the American Heart Association and some sort of nonprofit, Play 60, whatever. And then we need to find a way to make it so that, I need to add this program to my gym because it's going to give me more revenue, right? Yes. And that's the way to do it. You're not, hey, everyone, let's just get involved in powerlifting. It's like, no, you have to provide incentives.
Yeah, probably the closest thing that exists to that right now is at the opposite end of the age spectrum, which is Silver Sneakers, which is very similar, right? This nationwide program. Are you familiar with this at all? Yeah. But nationwide, it's government subsidized, right? It's targeted at a very specific demographic, right? So something similar to that, right? And like you said, the problem is,
I think not not so much like that. I'm thinking more like a franchise. So I own a gym, and I go to the Amateur Powerlifting Union, and I go, hey, I want to run some events, and I want to run a program. And they will give me a rubric. It won't like cost anything, but they'll give me a rubric and maybe a small fee or something to cover administrative costs. I'll go to them and I'll be like, hey, I want to open this program at my gym. I hear Johnny, my other gym owner, he makes a lot of money off this program. I want to open this program at my gym. You pay your small affiliate fee, blah, blah, blah. Maybe it's free. There's something going on. And you become an official Amateur Powerlifting Union gym. And then you can now host meets. You can now, and this is what Powerlifting America, again, is supposed to be doing. This is what they're supposed to be doing, exactly what I'm theorizing. Like, that's literally their job. And so you come in, you make this program, and then you become an affiliate of that. And then you now go and, hey, Johnny, you want to sign up for this affiliate program? Awesome. It's $100 a month. You get 3 classes. And then at the end of your 12 weeks, you're going to come to a meet. Bring everyone, bring your family. It's $5, $10 to come in. There'll be food, there'll be games. We'll have a good time. And so that is my vision for the youth level is we'll have some sort of, I mean, obviously I want to bend to Powerlifting America to get them to do this, or someone in Powerlifting America to do this. And it's going to help everyone, right? Like that's what USA Hockey does. That's their job. Their job is to promote the amateur level. They sanction, I don't even know how many, like, events. Like, every event at a local rink is a USA Hockey event. Like, and that should be the same thing. Every meet should be a Powerlifting America meet. And we kind of just try to make our system a little more normal. So that's my, and then the high school associations will take over after high school. IHSA, New Mexico.
Yes. Yeah.
Trying to do this for 3 years. It shouldn't cost any money. The comment is, so trying to do this for 3 years, I'm poor. If you can go, it shouldn't cost anything.
Yeah. I mean, that's again, that's a big cost.
Sweat equity. Like, it should not cost much.
Yeah.
It should, in fact, make money, actually.
No, it should. And that's one of the most frustrating things is this is not it's the same thing I talked about is why this is such a great sport for New Mexico high schools is that there's very little in the way of costs here. There's very little, like, there's not a lot that you need to spend on. Now, obviously, if you want giant productions like you see at pro level meets, sure, but you don't need that.
Every high school has a theater, like, ready built.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so, the production's there. Like, that's like Hinsdale South High School. I'm friends with the coach there, and we're gonna do he's actually he's the choir teacher. So, like, we have access to the theater. We're gonna do a meet in the theater. They've got AV, lights, sound, hundreds and thousands of dollars because it's it's not anyone else's money, so they spend all the money. And we've got this beautiful setup for meets. And, like, I feel like people are just like I try to talk to these high schoolers. I'm like, you guys have everything ready built for you guys.
Yeah.
Like, everything's ready built. Like, set up a platform in the auditorium, sanction a meet. Everything's already there. Run the meet. You have a weight room, probably with racks. You need one combo rack. You need one set of kilos. Like that. And all we need is we need a bunch of ads that just have me saying that. You can make money for your program if you set up a rack. You can make a ton of money for your program. You have all the resources. They have better resources than I do.
Yeah.
Like, I don't have a space like that. Like, so I think it's just a matter of, again, organizing this, getting the message, and, like, if I'm working on the pro level, I can't also be working on the, like, I can try, but, like, that ends up getting fucked up. Like, we need dedicated people working on the amateur level. But yeah, I think that it's all good. It's a matter of execution. But I think, like I said, there's bigger fish to fry as far as, like, building. If we build a pro apparatus, it'll be a lot easier to build all this stuff underneath it.
Yes. Yeah. But again, if there's nothing at the bottom. There's not very much in the way of the top end of the funnel at this point either, right? So it's like there's not much at other end, at either end.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, Johnny, we've got this lifting program after school. Come do it. Like I would make it. How, like, sometimes in high school the coaches are really, really, really strict. I would, like, take the opposite approach. I'd be like, hey, it's not a super serious program. Like, come train. It's open and available for you. And then every couple of weeks we do a meet. Come do the meet. Come bring your family. Like, come try it out. And just keep going from there. I think lifting is incredibly popular. I don't think it's like, it's not like wrestling. You know how, like, wrestling coaches have to, like, bully kids into doing it?
Yes.
I don't think you have to bully kids into lifting. Like, lifting is, like, cool now. Like, like, Seabaum lifts, right? Like,
yeah, you got to. Well, and, like, you have to be a little bit crazy to be a wrestler, right?
Yes,
But like,
right.
you see so many. There's kids of just all different kinds of kids to get into lifting,
Yeah.
right? Because like you, and that's kind of the nice thing too at the high school level. Like, it can be depending on what the kid is like. They can make it as hard or as easy as they want it to, right? So like, if you want to go do a high school meet and just say you did a meet, shit, you can go take 45 pounds for your squat, your bench press, and your deadlift, right? And say like you posted the total, something like that. Or, if you're really serious about it, it's something that allows you to push, right? The benefit of being an individual sport is that you can also capture, and what you're seeing in New Mexico too is you have a lot of kids that aren't like football players, like in Texas, like most of the
Well,
kids that
that's going to be
compete. Yeah,
frankly, that's going to be most of the people we're reaching out to are not going to be football players.
yeah,
They're going to
yeah,
be
yeah.
flex sheep. And to be completely honest, and this is like a weird thing, I don't think the archetype for a football player is the same as a powerlifter. I think we had thought that for a long time, but if you look at the type of people who are superstars, they're not necessarily always football players. Like the Joe Bornsteins and like some of these newer names coming up. I know Austin Perkins was and Russ was, but like
Blake
and
Sumner
Jesus.
was.
Right. I
Yeah.
think there is, but I think there's also an opportunity to capture an uncaptured demographic, especially the trends I see. Like the people who are coming in and are lifting and are being power lifters, like a lot of women aren't football players.
Sure.
So I think there's a unique opportunity to capture a market that maybe other sports don't. Which is good. Which is good for everyone. Anyone we can get more active is going to be good for us.
Mhm.
But yeah, all good stuff. We'll have to get everyone together in a meeting and fucking bully them into doing something about that.
Yeah, which again, that's one of the biggest challenges. I guess,
I can't
powerlifting in
do it
America.
all.
We can.
I can't
No,
do
no,
it
no, no,
all.
no,
I
no. I
can't.
hear
Like
you.
I'm like that's like I wanted.
Mhm.
I honestly just wanted to do it to put it out there and be like, when you put the Tupperware in the cabinet and then you close it. I just wanted to like put the Tupperware in there and then let someone else maybe
Yes. Yeah.
pick it
To,
up.
to be fair with Powerlifting America, it's still relatively new. We can maybe give them a little bit of a little bit of slack in that regard. But at the same time, like, yeah,
Yes,
no,
there's lots going on, but the mission of Powerlifting America is not to develop the MLB. The mission of Powerlifting America is promote powerlifting at an amateur level. It says it in their constitution. So
well,
like,
but going back to like the youth programs and everything,
yeah,
right? So that should be part of Powerlifting America.
and it will make the organization money.
Yes,
Like
yeah,
it will make
yeah.
the org money, which is needed for literally everything else you could possibly want to do. Whereas these pro events are just money sinks. Like they're just money sinks right now. Like there's nothing on the return end unless you're a sponsor. And there is an argument that more attention and eyeballs gets more people. I mean, they've converted most of the top talent over, so it's not like it hasn't worked. But in terms of like the USAPL is still generating 10 times the revenue with a way worse product, which is like
Right.
that sucks. Like that's shitty.
Yeah.
Like
Mm-hmm.
so. Yeah, I guess what else do I have on here? All right, I guess you want to talk next steps. You want to continue on this? I don't know how.
Yeah, I mean, well, again, like you said, a lot of this, and we've talked back and forth about a lot of this. A lot of this is just the execution and getting somebody to actually do it, right? Because it's not that hard. And I think part of the attitude is sort of like, like we said in the comments, trying to do this for 3 years, poor if you get this going or whatever. But again, it's like it doesn't require a lot. It's initially going to just require a little bit of sweat equity, a little bit of just some time, maybe a little bit of unpaid work at the front end, just to get the momentum going, right? Just to get some kids involved. And I can tell you from experience, like if you're a decent coach and you can at the very least keep the kids engaged, they're going to stick with it. They love it because it's fairly simple. Any of them can do it. You just got to find a way to get their foot in the door and get them involved, which now honestly is easier than ever, right? Yeah.
And the hope is what we do is we need to create first step to doing anything is to actually have the thing, right? So if we don't have any programs, we can't do anything, right? It's like I talk about all the time. Everyone's got all these different little ideas. We have no foundation, right? We have no like vessel to like do these ideas, right? So the first thing is we need to have actual programs for people to sign up for, right? Like that's step one. Step one is to actually have something. So I'm guilty of not having something. Like I don't have something yet, but I will have something where it'll be a youth program at MPG Fitness from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. It'll be 10 kids max. squat on Monday, bench on Tuesday, deadlift on Thursday, and then whenever I have a meet, that's when the kids will come to a meet, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'll hire someone to go do that, and they'll create this program. And then hopefully, what we hope is that it will be so good that more parents will tell the other parents about it, and more kids will join in, and they'll say, "Oh, look at Johnny at his meet. Johnny lifted this. Johnny did that." Mm-hmm. That's what we want. And then all I want to do is I want to get 50 other gyms to do the exact same thing. So that's the hope. And then we can add all these things, ideas and stuff about how we train. Like people were sliding up in that comment section. They kept going, they're not training hard enough. We need to do this. We need to do this. I'm like, well, we need the program in the first place. Like, let's get the program started, and then we can talk about training metrics and stuff like that.
Yeah, because at that point, and again, we're talking like before high school, like the junior high and even before that, like grade school level, the training doesn't even matter at that point, because they're not they're not at the point, because they're at the point too, like this. I think this is a huge misconception, is that even well into high school, a lot of these kids are not physically, hormonally equipped to go through the training process. And I think that's got to be a big emphasis on the program at that level, is just keep them engaged. Yes. Yeah.
There's something called in before 14, 13, one of those two. It's a phrase that actually I've worked with some consultants in the sports world, and they talk about how the NFL and MLB and all these things are trying to get kids to be fans very young, because neuroplasticity, right? If you become like, my dad sat me in front of the Chicago Bears when I was 8, and I've watched every game since, like literally every game since. And so we need to get kids in very young. So what we're going to do, it's a funnel, right? We want to get as many kids as possible underneath the barbell between the ages of 8 and 10, right? And then we hope, because 70% of kids don't ever play sports again after 13 anyway, we hope we can get 30% of them to stick, right? And of that 30%, we hope that 10% stay around and do it in high school. And we hope another 1% go on and do it at the college level. And so what we need to do is we widen that funnel, and then when we will get to more better athletes, right? Better athletes, more spectators, all these things are what we hope. But yeah, that's
and not even so much better, but just I think the real emphasis needs to be on more. Yeah. Right. It's just cast a wider net.
Like a long-term, we need better talent, because better talent will attract more eyeballs, and more eyeballs equals more sponsorship. So, that's a long term.
In this, I think we can kind of start to transition into more things at the top end and growing that side of it. And better talent does not, especially if you want to think about what's going to draw in more people. Something we've talked about is something that powerlifting is getting a little better at, but is still lacking, is personalities and stories. Right?
I 100% disagree. I think we have I think everything is right there. The personality.
Why are we using? Then where is it? We don't have a Schwarzenegger. Are you kidding me?
Hold on. These guys on social media are so fucking good. They are incredible. They do incredible. Bob Matthews, Russ, they do incredible content. But guess what? They compete once a year. You never see it. You never get to see it. You never get to see their personalities. You see them once a year. Again, we have great people who do great content, who have tons of followers, who do good stuff. We just never get to see them. We see them once a year at Sheffield, and everyone goes back into the cocoon. And it's not like it's broadcasted at a reasonable time on a weekend. It's it's not a very accessible sport. There isn't a lot of competitive content. And so I 100% disagree. You can't tell a story with one event. What's the story? And then it just disappears. How fast our news cycle goes. So I don't disagree that those things are incredibly important. Those things are vital. And I think they try as best as they can to hype up these things, but they're flashes in a pan. I mean, we're not going to get another Sheffield until a year from now.
Why isn't there more? Why isn't there? It feels like there could be more better promo with around Sheffield then, right? So you think about, for example,
what are you going to do? Talk about it for 365 days?
Yeah, or again,
going to get burnt out. They don't talk about. They talk about the Super Bowl for 2 weeks, and that's it. And then they go on to the draft. What do they talk about? The combine. We move on to the next thing, right? We just don't. Again, we don't have enough content. That's the number one.
Yeah,
That's the biggest issue right now.
more is better, but again, that's, you know, it just feels like they could do more. If there is like one big event, it feels like they could do a little bit more with what they've got, right? Like if it, like again, it feels like there could be more hype, there could be more stories, there could be more, like it just feels like they could do a lot more. For example, like in bodybuilding, it's like there's really, I mean, nobody really cares about anything outside of the Olympia, right?
Right, and that's a problem for bodybuilding too.
I don't
Like
it's way more popular than powerlifting is.
Okay, so here, hold on.
Mm-hmm.
So here, I actually agree. That's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
I think, God, I mean, okay, so I mean, I'll tell you why. I think they're both in the same bucket, but the Olympia is ran by a for-profit private equity company.
Sure.
Like,
sure. Yeah.
That's the difference right there.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's the difference between the two sports. The two sports both lack content. It's just one is ran by a for-profit and one is ran by a non-for-profit committee.
But
like, there's your difference there. They're both. I mean, the sport of bodybuilding is, in terms of net revenue, is not that large. Like, it's larger than powerlifting for sure. But there's your answer to why bodybuilding is more powerful. They're putting more money into it. They're doing more advertising. Mm-hmm. It's been a for-profit thing for a while. I still don't think they have enough content. I think they could do better if they had more events. But
for sure,
and they do have more events. They do. Frankly, they have more pro shows. They have more content.
But they're in a similar situation where, you know, the top guy, and it's been like this for forever. The top guys, whoever's Mr. Olympia, only does Mr. Olympia, right? They're not doing stuff in between. And so even going back to, again, and here's another thing too, is so, you know, how did they get, it wasn't like it was birthed out of some private equity partners' minds and then like, we're just going to put a ton of money behind this and make this giant thing. It's like, no, it was a lot smaller. Right. Up to a certain point, right? And it has always been oriented towards one event, right? That was the point of the creation of the Olympia, is like this one event is really what bodybuilding is going to be all about, right? So part of it is, how did they get from where they were to where they were still doing, even when Arnold came onto the scene, how did they get from doing the finals of Mr. Olympia in high school gyms to where it is now, right?
So what's interesting from what I've gathered in my perspective is it has gotten much, like it has gotten much better, much just the past handful of years. Like what they did this year, because the Olympia sold. I think it sold for like $8 million or something like that. It sold, and what the new company is doing is incredible. Like I looked at ticket prices, I was like, holy, like that's a huge, like it was like $800 to get in the door. Mm-hmm. Like they're doing exactly. I mean, so here, let's talk Olympia weekend. Okay, so Olympia weekend starts with an expo, right? The expo is, I mean, expos are huge money if they're done right. Everyone wants to go. It's in the Las Vegas Convention Center. It's in the entertainment capital of the world. Someone keeps calling me. The event itself is at Resorts World. They charge a ton of money for tickets. They charge a ton of money for spectators. They charge a convention pass. I mean, it is a robust for-profit enterprise. Like, we don't have that in powerlifting. Like, we don't have, like, when you go to Sheffield, it's not an expo plus amateur events plus pro events. It's just one, and actually, I like it better that way, honestly. I think you could benefit from doing it the other way. But it's a real business, right? They make lots of money. And so, like, obviously that's if you wanted to keep powerlifting the way it was, which is not my cup of tea, that's how I would do it, right? I would get a bunch of partners together. I would rent it. I would start with a convention center or part of a convention center. I do the Powerlifting World Expo. I would rent a theater in Vegas. I would do it. That would be the pinnacle of the sport, right? And it's really that's not a terrible plan. Mm-hmm. Not horrible. I much prefer the team component just because I'm just a bigger fan of that. I think it's more interesting. I think it has a higher ceiling, a much, much higher ceiling. And so even if you don't hit that ceiling, but you did 10% of that ceiling, I think you still get to a higher place than a sport that has one event a year.
Here's something to go back to as well. And obviously there's I don't know if Sheffield helps or hurts this, but the way that the team thing works is that the emphasis on the sport being a sport too should be winning, right? it shouldn't just be about the raw numbers, right? It shouldn't just be about who can hit the biggest numbers, because it's great to say something. So and this was something that really, I think, actually really hurt multiply lifting. It was all about the rules got really lax, the judging standards got really, really bad, all for the
I
sake
mean,
of
you
just
saw it
pushing
at
the number.
Sheffield. You saw it at Sheffield this year. These lifts that I've never seen lifts on an IPF stage like get called the way they were getting called.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I've never meals deadlift should not. I mean, not the IPF I know and love would have never
Yes.
called that a good
Yeah.
lift. Ever.
Exactly. So that's something to I think where part of the focus of the sport needs to be. It's about winning. It's about victory, right? That's what it should be.
I mean, what other sport is not about winning?
Exactly. Well, you can maybe.
I mean, you win by hitting the most amount of weight. Yeah, I mean track, but track's not.
But if you go back to like, well, here's like a great example is like why is Michael Jordan considered better, like the greatest over somebody like Wilt Chamberlain or Kareem Abdul-Jabbar? Kareem scored way more points than Jordan did over his career, but did he win like Jordan did? Like, no, right? Did Wilt win like Jordan did, right? Like that's the big separator, right?
Well, I think Jordan had both because obviously Wilt had more championships, but it wasn't. It's about their contribution to those as well. Like his contribution to the championships is why Jordan's the GOAT. Like
exactly, yeah, exactly, right.
It's not just titles, but it's right.
Yeah. So it was more like one of the reasons that Ed Cohn is considered the greatest, especially by like more people on the eastern side of the world, is because of his IPF accomplishments, right? Like obviously he put up some enormous numbers after he got kicked out and everything like that, but it was the fact that he went to these IPF worlds and dominated at the highest level. Like that's what really matters, right? It's everybody's more wrapped up in like all this shit that happens at the local meets, and this is, I think, part of the issue, again, more on like the untested and sort of the anything goes kind of side of powerlifting. But yeah, that the only way that the team thing works is, again, it's winning. That's what really matters. It's the titles, it's a championship, and so more emphasis on that. And that's where I think obviously Sheffield being a big deal is good, but there also needs to be more. I don't know who's responsible. Maybe Powerlifting America, for example, put more emphasis on IPF worlds like that really in the World Games. Like that's really the pinnacle of the sport, right? That's the closest thing we got to the Olympics.
The problem is, I mean, I've talked. So I've played devil's advocate, right? I literally have just played. If I were to keep things how they were but make them better, how I would do it. And I think I've done it on a podcast where I literally just talk about how I would make the IPF work, right? And so what I would do is I would do IPF Worlds, and what I would do is I would only take the top 2 in each weight class, and I would put them in a 16 lifter flight. And so I would make it super short, and I would put all the best lifters in one day. I would do all the women together on one day in 2 flights of 8. And then the next day this would be at the end of the competition. Mm-hmm. And I would do 2 flights of 8, the top 2 in each weight class. Because frankly, the problem right now, among 10,000 other things, is that if, let's say it's the 83 weight class and there's 12 in a flight or whatever, only the top 3 are competitive. So you're going to watch the bottom 9 like paint dry, waiting for the other 3 to go. Like that's what makes it unwatchable. It's just frankly unwatchable in that construction. So all I would do is I would keep everything the same. I would just put all the best lifters in a primetime session. Everyone would lock in, right? I don't have to watch 10 days of competition, right? I get to watch 1 or 2 events, and I'm not. There's some argument about if that could be better or worse. I take it either way. Mm-hmm. But people only want to see the best athletes, right? And if you don't want to go the team direction, so the team direction solves this problem because every lifter matters, right? The problem right now is you watch IPF Worlds, only like you're waiting for the top lifters to go, and that's just not that's not a scalable. That doesn't scale past a hardcore powerlifting fan. Hardcore powerlifting fan is not tuning in for that, right? They're going to get fucking bored. It's just not going to happen. And so when I speak, I talk about scaling past the cat. Of course, people are watching Sheffield. Okay, if it was the only thing on for hardcore powerlifting fans, of course it's going to sell out, right? If I'm the only restaurant in town, of course I'm going to be the only one serving food. Like, of course I'm going to make lots of money. It's like there's just no competition, so you can't really judge how well it's doing, right? USA PL, right? We didn't know how bad it was until a competitor arrived. But as soon as a competitor arrived, it just completely shit the bed. And it was just run poorly, right? 6 weeks to get emails back. Like it just shows, the colors have been shown. So, yeah, I think there's a way to make what currently happens. Like Sheffield, like my problem with Sheffield is that just needs to be 2 days, right? It's too long of an event. Yes. It's the athletes are great. The production's good. It just needs to be a shorter event. It's just too long. That's really the only thing that's like, and it needs to move out of fucking Sheffield. Like,
yes.
Okay, so if you were to make up a country that was shit, England would be like really close. Like at least countries in Africa, the weather's okay. All right, but like it's pretty dog.
It's not great. It's not great. I think just kind of zooming out, something to keep in mind with some of the people, kind of the changes you're proposing. None of this significantly alters the nature of the sport, right? You're not changing anything with the lifts or the judging standards or anything. I'm saying this is a positive from your perspective, right?
I am proposing a pretty. So here, there's 2 buckets, right? There's like, if I made a list, there's list 1, which is like basic changes, right? Like shorter meets, better comments, like betting. All these things are like no-brainers, right? They might be hard to execute, but they're all kind of no-brainers, right? You have that list. And I will argue with anyone all day on that list. Like everyone can shut the fuck up about that list. Then I have my dark side list. And unfortunately, in order to do everything I want to do on the A side list, I have the dark side list. And the dark side list, I propose instead of everyone competing every 12 weeks, they compete every week for 12 weeks. And so that's usually where I lose people, right? Or some people. And some people understand what I'm trying to get at, but that's where I lose people. And that's where the biggest kind of wedge is right now between where we're at and where I want to be. I understand it's insane. It's supposed to be. It's not supposed to be. Professional sports aren't for everyone. It's supposed to be hard. And so that's where the biggest wedge exists right now. So I do think it's completely radical because it's going to completely alter the nature of training. Does it all, like you said, does it alter the actual physical nature of the sport? No, I didn't want to do that because I believe it's like almost there. I believe like the how we package it needs to change, but I think like the excitement of watching someone, like you get down to your last deadlift and you got to pull this shit to win. Like you got to fucking rip that shit off the ground to win. Like that's a moment. Like that's a fucking picture moment. Like jump. Like that's a sports moment. Like when you pull for the win, that's like I'm in my basement as a kid training. I gotta pull this for the win. I gotta pull this to win. Yeah. Like that's Jordan, Game 6, 98. That's and it's just like you can really like I can see it, right? I feel the excitement when that's how I started this. I went to collegiate nationals and I felt the excitement of the crowd. I've been to all kinds of sporting events. I was like, there's something here, right? And then you got to bench 2.5 hours later and the meet was still going on and I just wanted to leave. And so now we just condense the meet to like 2 hours long and get the thing to an actual conclusion, right? No one wants to drag out this thing to wait for a conclusion.
Yeah. But to go back to what we talked about, like that idea of lifting weekly for like 12 weeks, again, that's put the emphasis. Well, again, that would make it way more interesting because then I want to see what people's different strategies are, right? Because again, the point is then winning. It's not just trying to. In that situation, you can't go out and put up the biggest numbers that you possibly can every weekend, right? Or at least if you try, like if that's your strategy, like that might be really interesting. But again, back to the emphasis of just winning, a victory, right? It's the numbers only matter so much in that you're doing what you need to do to get to the top. I will also say too, like as somebody who's trained Westside for like 6 years, like do we max out every week?
It's not so, like, right.
It's not asking. That's not asking for a lot.
No one hears what I have to say and goes, "That's not interesting." All right, they go, "Everyone's going to get hurt," which I say is your training problem. That's your problem. Figure out your training.
And again, to your point, if that's the top level of the sport, you're not doing it for health. You're doing it because you're putting all that shit out on the line, right?
Right. And so what Big Body said on the last podcast, I don't know if you watched, but he goes, the only way you're going to get them to do that is this. And that's where we're at right now. Where we're at right now is we've got A-side list stuff, and that's all great. But the only way to get athletes who are good enough to be marketable is the problem. Like the only way to get athletes who I can market, who are good enough to market, who can help this kind of propel this, is with this. And that's why, venture capital, like talking to all these people, flying all over the country to talk to people about how we raise money for this is what's going on right now. For people who are tuning in. That's where we're at right now. And then we can do everything we talk about. We can do Drive to Survive. We can do all these other things, but the foundation, unfortunately, in our American country is money.
Yes, and it's not just even in America. It's you just even looking at the history of powerlifting as a sport, where the money is dictated where people have gone, right? So back in the 80s, where you had the first big money meets, are you familiar with the Budweiser record breakers? No. Okay. No. There was a series of meets put on by Gus Rethwish, who's probably best known for, he was the founder of WOBDL, the World Association of the Bench Press and Deadlift, which is this big, it was pretty big for a while through like the Midwest, but especially in the West Coast. But he put these meets on in Hawaii that he got Budweiser to sponsor. So Budweiser put in a ton of money, and the whole idea was very much like a Sheffield thing. The payouts and it wasn't based on any kind of formula. It was still done by weight classes, and the individual winners were determined by, so like a normal powerlifting meet, but you got these big bonuses depending on whether or not you broke world records in your weight class. But that was after the ADFPA and the USPF split, and it was a USPF meet. And so you had even some people that kind of jumped from the ADFPA to go do the Budweiser Hawaii record breakers meet, because that's where the money was.
I'm looking. It's got an open powerlifting listing.
Yeah. So then you got back, kind of going back to when I got into it. Again, even though the IPF has always been the biggest the biggest federation, its affiliates have always been the biggest as well. So in the early 2000s, not to say that the USAPL was not a huge organization, but the place where the most people were going, and really the best lifters, were going to the WPO because they were giving out tens of thousands of dollars in cash prizes. So you had guys even from Europe that were jumping from the IPF, like high level, like world championship level IPF lifters, like Evgeny Yarambash, like Vadim Devanyuk, Alexander Kutcher.
That goes to the point I think we made earlier, where everything is just cyclical. So like the IPF is at the top right now because Sheffield is where all the money's at.
Yes.
Right. And then the second someone comes up with an untested meet that's got more money, everyone will just switch again. And it's just constantly cycling. And so what ends up happening is you get these sponsors who put this money in. They put this money in, and then there's no return, and so it just lasts as long as the sponsor is willing to funnel it.
Exactly.
Right?
So in the case of the WPO, I don't know if you know about this, but the guy that started it was an inheritance, and that's where the money came from. And then that died because I forget which year it was. If it was like 2007 or 2008, people went to go cash the checks, and they bounced because his money ran dry, and that killed it. And it died immediately after that because there's there's no more money.
There's any number of reasons why I haven't done another one, and it's because I refuse to. We made a little bit of money on the last one, and so I just refuse to do it again because in order to get the talent we need, it's gonna take a loss, and we just can't. We can't do that. Like there's, if I knew I had quite a bit of runway, like from an investor, I could do some other things differently, but there's really no reason in a sport like we have now to take a loss on an event. Like they're charging enough money for ticketing that you should be able to. Like sports leagues work this way, right? They make X number of revenue, right? Half of it goes to the athletes in form of a salary cap. Done. That's it. Like that's how it works. It's like we know exactly how much athletes are going to make in roughly every sport, and then what happens is you hope that you build a big enough sport where you can cover all your costs and make profit that way. So that's generally the way I see it going forward. And that I don't know if anyone has ever okay, so he's doing this thing. Let's go back to the Budweiser thing. He's doing this thing, and what's the hope? Like, what's the next step? Like you do this event, and then you hope you sell enough tickets to cover that. You hope it gets enough eyeballs that Budweiser continues to sponsor it.
Yeah. Well, this goes back to something we talked about with the youth thing. Is like there's never really been any long-term vision for the sport beyond the next meet or just the next year, right? So with the Budweiser stuff, it was more like just keep doing the one-off events and keep hoping that does its thing. But as far as I know, and it's the same thing when the WPO was at its thing. It's like there wasn't a trajectory that was thought out, right? It was just
Right.
1 year at a time, 1 year at a time. Let's just try to keep it going as best we can, and fingers crossed that we can have the money to make it happen. There really wasn't. Part of that is, in the words of Mark Ripito, this is powerlifting is a white trash sport at its heart, right? It's really, so part of it is
it's evolved. That's why I'm bullish. I think it was. I think you're right.
Yes.
People were smoking weed outside my untested meet the other day. I'm like, what are you doing? Okay, so that's not even pond and a walking path. And they're not even fucking door.
That's not even that bad. That's legal in Illinois now, right? That's not even. We're not even going to talk about the intravenous stuff that's happening.
Right.
Yeah, but it has evolved, and I think for the better. And this, I think this is part of the challenge is, and I know you're running up against this. I'm running up against this in certain places too, and have honestly where when I was trying to help out Dennis is you're running into an old guard that's very much like this is always how we've done things, and we're going to continue to do it because they're kind of comfortable with where it's at, despite the fact that their words might say otherwise and that they want it to grow and they want it to develop into something bigger. But I think the positive thing is there's enough people that are relatively young that do want things to change and want to see it change.
I was just about to actually interject because it's like the current athletes who are at the top of the sport are not going to bear the fruits of this. They're not going to receive any. They're never going to get to the. Obviously, I talk about private jets and stuff.
Yes.
They're never going to see that. Frankly, they won't. And so, I mean, I've talked about like giving them equity and stuff. So like there is an incentive. Like someday you will if you're an early adopter of Facebook, that's going to be my new selling point. To be like, get in now. If it doesn't work, you go back to doing the other thing. If it works, you might be early in on Facebook.
Yeah.
Like I genuinely believe that. So yeah, I think the generation of current athletes may never see the fruits of this. They'll be out of the sport. They'll still be around, but they may see it. But I think that is a tough thing, right? Because you've got this thing that you can go grab now, but then you've got this other thing that who knows. But actually, I think this scales really fast. Like I think it can scale really, really fast.
Yeah, and again, because it goes back to it doesn't require a ton of investment, right? We don't need enormous purpose-built stadiums. Like the facilities are already there, the equipment is already there, the people are already there. It's just kind of putting the right things in the right places to make it happen, to get it to align, right? And again, like people are going to have to make some changes within the sport and that are running things behind the scene in the sport. A few things are going to have to change, right? And honestly, that's the barrier right now. And again, like you're not fundamentally altering the sport. It's not like you're changing the lifts. You're not changing how the meet itself is being run, anything like that, right? You're still going to bench. You're still going to squat. You're still going to deadlift. It's 3 attempts as much as you can put up. Like the most fundamental part of the sport remains the same, but the format, the layout, in order for it to be more spectator friendly, in order for it to attract more eyeballs and ultimately sponsorship money, etc. Like there's some things have to change. And again, to emphasize, that doesn't sound like it alters the sport at its most fundamental. It stays the same, but things are going to have to be tweaked in order for it to grow.
Yeah, I continue to go back. I think it does and it doesn't because the chief thing with the sport right now is you want to lift as much weight as possible, right? And I think that is a fundamental tenet of the sport. You need to lift as much weight as possible. And we're transitioning away from I need to lift as weight as much possible to I need to win for my team or I need to win as an individual, right? We're just switching the sport around to something different. So I do think it's a fundamental change in that aspect, and that may be what scares people. That's why it's a column B thing, right? It's at the bottom. I kind of bury the lead. I talk about all the other things, and then I talk about like what we'd have to do to get that all to happen. But yeah, I'm not. I think we got about 10 more minutes ish, where I think we can wrap up here shortly. But yeah, not necessarily. I'm really bullish on it. Obviously, I've talked a lot about how it's a personal thing. Like I have to decide if I want to leave my current job and go take this on or something. But right now it's just about raising money. It's about finding the right billionaire. I've joked about, like, you find one billionaire who's bored, one Saudi whose son is into powerlifting.
Yes.
And you could really change things. And I for not a lot of money. I've talked with like a couple of people about how much it would cost and stuff. And I don't think it's anything crazy. It's just all my money or a little bit of someone else's money. That sounds a little better to use a little bit of someone else's money as opposed to all my money.
But in terms of like the finances from an institutional standpoint, it's not that much. Which is also part of the challenge, because, like, you know, having had a stint in investment banking, like, if it's too small of a number, it's just totally uninteresting, right? Like, it's not worth it, right? So I think
I don't think it's too small. I think I wanted to, if I wanted to, like, so here, that's also why it's actually a little difficult, because I'm a kind of a made man. So, like, if I don't get the terms I want, like, I had a deal on the table. They wanted to do the whole fucking venture capital thing where they fucking rape and pillage my company. And I'm like, I'm not taking your deal. I'm not giving you more than half of my fucking company. I have my own business. I have a track record of this. I'm not taking your terms. And so, you know, it ended up that deal may have changed powerlifting, but I'm not doing it because it's just not my thing. That's another issue. But yeah, I don't think it's that much. I think all in, it was going to be about $1 million, and that would have been like on a 5-year plan. We would have hopefully made significantly more money than that and been able to reinvest that. But it was about $1 million over 5 years, and that would have done everything we needed to do in terms of the sport. Because what's interesting is we're vertically integrated. So, like, we would have a local meet in the morning that would cover most of the expenses, and then we would, you know, have to travel all the athletes out, and we have to pay them and give them benefits and stuff. But the most of the expenses would be paid for, and then that top level would hopefully be paid for with ticketing and stuff. And then as we would scale, we would add in the streaming, and we would add in the commercials and stuff. And we would that's the like, the underlying stuff is actually really easy. Like, running the event itself, getting like, that's easy. It's the streaming and the video production that's, like, insane. Like, a single broadcast is like $50,000, like, because you're talking about like 20 people on staff. So that's where most of the money goes to. It goes to that live production, which is where all people are watching. Wait, did you subscribe to the abs thing, right?
Yes.
That was my brainchild. I actually invented that, and he actually impressed me, because 2 weeks later he had the thing rocking and rolling. But that would be a similar thing we would do, is develop some sort of streaming platform.
Also, we've talked about this. Good commentators make a big difference.
Yeah, and again, that's a money thing, right? Yes. Like, I've been in the DMs of the Clippers radio guy. He's a charismatic feller, and it's like we talked about it because he's got friends who did pilot. They're like, you got to come out and do a meet and stuff. It's like, but to rip that guy away from a private plane on the Clippers, I mean, he's probably not making anything insane, but, like, it's like, to do that is just a lot of money. Like, to get, I mean, and like, also, like it's a chicken and egg thing, because, like, the best way to get good commentators is to sell the rights to ESPN and let them work on it, right? Like, you just go, no problem, and they bought the rights, so now they're gonna find the best fucking person they could possibly find. And so it's like there's a lot of chicken and egg here, and that's what comes with it. But yeah, good commentators. Like one of the first things we would do is I would go to Syracuse or I'd go to USC, and I'd go to their department and be like, who's the best broadcaster you have? And I would literally pick them out, and I would let them be John Anik for the next 20 years. Like, they would be our lead guy. They would be at every single event. They would do every single broadcast, and they would grow with the company, right? They'd be the voice of powerlifting, quite literally. And then you bring in some ex-athletes, and you find charismatic ex-athletes, and you put them on the color side, and you can kind of, maybe those people rotate in and out, and, like, you kind of find the best person. But that anchor, that voice of powerlifting, that you are now looking live, you know, that's really important. But again, we can't do that without the first.
We need some money. They probably want a salary for that.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. No. And listen, you find, like, there's a lot of kids in broadcasting who are very good. It's not like that's not anything crazy. I don't think that's a hard thing. Like, you pay them per event, you fly them out, you cover their travel. I don't think it's like the craziest thing. But again, it's all a money thing. It's all money. to do that. But I don't think it's not a hard problem to solve. Like I don't.
No.
I think that the fact that we haven't found someone willing to volunteer to do that is crazy. Well, I tried to volunteer, and like it just, again, with the bureaucracy and stuff.
It's just finding. Well, again, it's finding somebody good and somebody that, because a big part of that is not just having good ones, but like you said, having the same one. The consistency is a big part of it, right? Like a big draw of Sunday Night Football was like, it's going to be Al Michaels every single time you tune in, right? Or like when it was geez, how many people like of our parents and our grandparents' generation tuned into Fox because it was John Madden and what's his name? Who's the guy with the drinking problem? I can't remember his name. You know who I'm talking about? The other old dude that was paired up with him.
That must have been before me, because John Madden was with Al Michaels.
No, before
Sunday Night Football.
Before Michaels.
Sure.
But anyway,
I never watched John Madden on Fox. I was too young, or too old. I don't know. Too young.
But yeah, that's again a pretty easy fix. You just need some financing for it. That's it. Yes.
Precisely. Yeah.
Anything we didn't cover that you wanted to just touch on? I don't have the agenda in front of me, but we got a few minutes to wrap it up.
I talked about everything I needed. I wanted to talk about. This was great. I appreciate you coming on. Hopefully we. Is that your brother or something?
That's my brother. Yeah, Bill is Gino. Oh my God, what an amazing guy.
So the Gino thing, Gino's kind of. I feel like Gino should be the mascot, not the MC. Yeah. Like Gino's amazing, and so like he should come out, rile up the crowd, and then go take pictures for the rest of the meet. And then someone like a real PA should do the PA, and that way it doesn't distract from the things. Yeah. But yeah, I love Gino too. It's just different roles. It's like for example, like Ryan Lapidat, King of the Lifts, he does the play-by-play, right? He's not a good play-by-play guy, right? He's supposed to be the color commentator. He's supposed to be the guy that says the goofy shit, and like he was an ex-athlete. He should talk about the athletics, and then someone with a commanding tone who went to broadcasting school who can kind of rein in those color commentators should be that person.
Yeah.
And so
have you ever watched it was, I think it was like the 77 or 78 IPF Worlds that the Wide Worlds of Sport broadcasted on ABC?
Oh, no, I didn't know that it got.
No. Okay. So, which is a perfect example of this. So play-by-play was Brian Gumbel. And then the color commentator was Terry Todd, right? So you had somebody who Brian Gumbel doesn't know anything about powerlifting, but he knows how to describe what's happening, knows to keep the audience engaged.
Color commentator, hey, what's going on there? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a great comment. Yeah, go back and listen to it. Here's another great thing in terms of the formatting, because what they did was, obviously they didn't do it live because it would have taken fucking 10 hours, right? Like to broadcast everything. Yeah, so it was all condensed down, but then in between they had all these like human interest pieces. So they had a great one on Doug Young where they went to Brownswood, Texas, talked about him, his background, had some training footage, things like that. They did that with some of the other athletes.
Those are basic parts of a sports broadcast. Yes. It's almost why I'm even pushing it back and back and back, because all I want to do is fucking build something out, sell it to ESPN, and let them they're professionals at that. That's what they do. Like me trying to do that shit on my laptop and like with different contractors, it's just stupid. Create the sport, sell it, let them do the broadcast, focus on the operation, focus on making sure it's all good. Mm-hmm. I know I've kind of gone back and forth on that because UFC does their own production and that's really successful for them. Yep. But I think we could really do a number if we did end up outsourcing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Cool, man. Thank you guys all so much. We got to wrap up here. Bill's got to go. I got to go. I think that's it. Any closing thoughts?
No, that's it. Good conversation as always. We talk a lot behind the scenes as well, but I think ultimately we want the same thing. Is we want to see the sport to grow. Want to see it be like just blow up. It's funny because it brings back to mind. I remember being with a friend of mine who was another teenage powerlifter back in Texas, and we were at a Dallas Mavericks game in the American Airlines Center. And I just remember sitting there with him and it's like, wouldn't this be amazing if there was a powerlifting meet in here someday? And it really, we talked about like what that would look like and everything. And honestly, then that felt like it would never happen. This is 20 years ago that we're talking about when we were talking about this. But it honestly feels like, again, if the right things can fall into place, that's something that can happen.
I don't think it's out of the realm that Sheffield the event itself can and will get to that. Because again, like I said, it's a monopoly. Like if you're a powerlifting fan and you want to see the best powerlifters, there's only one place to do it.
Yes.
Like that's it. Like you're not going to Worlds where it's 10 days long. Like there's one night when it's all the best powerlifters. And so because it's a monopoly, like you have to go to that. So I don't think it's out of the realm that across the whole span of the earth that 14,000 people are going to show up in a stadium.
Yes.
Like that's not out of the realm of possibility. I in fact think it's a probability at this point. It's just the fact that even if that event sold every single seat up at an average ticket price of $100 and generated $1.4 million, if half that money went to the athletes, it still wouldn't even be $50,000 per athlete.
Yeah.
And so it's not getting us to where I believe we can be. And so, I think I want to wrap it up with that. I'm MPG Poppy.
I'm Bill Coyne.
And this was Listen for Commands. Thank you, guys.